Justin Frenette here, co-founder and CEO of Him and Her, and host of the Pre-Con Recon podcast, where we talk about all things brand and marketing in the pre-construction real estate market. I invite leaders to share their knowledge and strategies for success, empowering our community to thrive now and in the future. This episode is brought to you by Him and Her, a creative agency specializing in exceptional branding for real estate and high-end consumer goods. Over the past 8 years, we've helped shape and sell over $2.5 billion in real estate projects, crafting and executing strategies that deliver extraordinary results. From successful, multi-year, master-planned, mixed-use communities, both high and low-rise, to transforming underperforming locations into sought-after destinations, to selling out residential towers in just 23 minutes, we empower our partners to achieve success in any market condition. If you're looking to launch a pre-construction project and want to learn more, reach out to us at himandher.ca. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to Jordan Taylor from Deco Homes. Jordan recently was on the podcast, and Him and Her have had the pleasure of working with Jordan and his team in the GTA on a project called Honeystone. Jordan and I had a really great chat, and he's got some great insights to share, so make sure to check that episode out. Today, I have the opportunity to sit down with Carrie Curtis. Carrie joined Killam in 2019 and is the Vice President of Ontario and Western Canada. Carrie's focus is primarily related to development and acquisitions and works through the full development lifecycle, from purchase of lands, entitlements, design, construction, and handover to the property management team. Carrie is also involved in the acquisitions and dispositions of apartments in Ontario and the West. Before joining Killam, Carrie spent 21 years in consulting engineering, primarily focusing on the residential and ICI sectors. She holds a Bachelor of Applied Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Waterloo and is a professional engineer, licensed in Ontario. Killam Apartment REIT, based in Halifax, is one of Canada's largest residential landlords, owning, operating, managing, and developing a diverse portfolio of apartments, manufactured homes, and seasonal properties. Carrie, thanks for joining me today.
No problem.
Now, before we dive in, I do like to ask my guests what it is you love about what you do.
Pretty much everything, to be quite honest.
Okay.
I'm pretty fortunate that every day I come to work, I'm surrounded by some very smart and talented and passionate people, and every day I have the opportunity to learn, and every day is different. So it's really motivating to come to work and learn something new every day, and it never seems to stop in that evolution. And then getting to work through all of the design processes and things of that nature in the building, and then to finally see our residents enter their homes for the first time. It's pretty exciting. So great motivating career, and certainly something I enjoy doing every day.
I love it. And I have to agree, there's something about selling a home and seeing a building that's going to be standing there for a long time. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Now, your transition from engineering to real estate development, how did that happen? What does that journey look like?
Yeah, it was sort of definitely a journey. I started, my early career sort of in that environmental realm, graduating fresh out of school, and then started doing road reconstructions, and then moved to this site development realm. And that's when I really started to find what I was passionate about, really, when it came to that building. I'd always wanted to build.
Okay.
And when I was working in the consulting realm, I was working on one of Killam's first properties in Cambridge, their first Ontario build, and that's when
Okay.
I met our CEO Phil and my current boss Mike, and they were such smart men, and very kind, and very just, I had left me with a really good impression. So, it was probably 10 years later that our paths crossed again, and this opportunity became available. And, 6 years ago, I joined the team here, and it's been quite an incredible journey, going from sort of that consulting side where I was, working on these types of projects from the consulting realm, and then moving up to the ownership side. So it's been a pretty pretty fun journey, actually.
I'm sure time has flown as it
Yes.
does. And how has some of that engineering consulting background helped you influence the decisions you're making at Killam and on the projects you're working on?
Yeah, you know what, it's been such a, I want to say it was a bit of an easy transition at the beginning.
Okay.
Certainly because the project teams that I was working on as a consultant are the same teams that we retained as owners. So I just really shifted gears, just roles. And so, at first I think the transition was harder because they kept asking me technical questions about um, the project that they were supposed to be telling me the answers to. So that was a little bit of a transition, but um, you know, it's interesting because I would always approach the projects in the same way. If we're doing due diligence, the things that I would write in the report from the as a consultant, I'm now really I process from the owner side, so I'm watching for those same things, and it's a good background to start from because you really have that technical expertise ahead of time,
Mm.
and certainly cost savings and all of those things are very helpful. But you look at a project, how you would design it and how it's going to work on a site and all of those things. You're looking at it from that lens. And then, I think as engineers, we're really trained to, analyze and evaluate and problem solve. And really that's what real estate's about. And to be successful in the real estate realm, you really have to have that sort of eye and the training. And I want to say not working from an emotional brain
Mm.
side. You're really working from that a real practical problem solving brain side. So I think that engineering background is very sort of helpful in that context.
Okay. Now, Killam as a business and product portfolio, for those who might not be familiar, could you describe some of the major projects you guys work on, typical projects you work on, or maybe one that's upcoming to give a sense of what you're typically working on?
Yeah, sure. So we're a publicly traded REIT, and we own, roughly 270 properties across 7 provinces. And then we also have commercial buildings and then manufactured home communities. So in all, we're about 19,000 units, apartment units across Canada, and 6,000 manufactured home communities.
Just a couple.
Um, so just a couple, but it's a great range, right? So we have our sort of the acquisitions we've made over the course of the years. So buildings ranging back from like 1950s, 1960s
Wow.
to the new builds that we're working on now. So we're working on new builds in geez, I want to say three provinces at the moment.
Okay.
And across the country, from basically actually 4 provinces now. I think about from Victoria to Halifax.
Wow.
So a broad range of builds and broad range of sizes. From a 6-story wood frame to 30-story high rise.
Wow.
So it's certainly a broad range of product, broad range of municipalities and jurisdictions and regulations and all of those things that we sort of hit across the board. So it's certainly diverse, but
Yeah.
our pipeline is um, geez, I would venture to guess 10,000 units at this stage, and
Okay.
always taking on more.
Yeah.
But we've got a significant pipeline across the country, and it's sort of fun to be able to work in multiple jurisdictions and make things happen.
And would you say, kind of as a side point to that, juggling all the rules and regs, if you were to give it a percentage, is 50% of the know-how in a region the same, 90%, or like not the same at all?
Not the same at all. It's it's even just when you take a building, like thankfully we have wonderful consultants in each of our jurisdictions that we work
Yeah.
with who are always the top of the game and very helpful in the guiding process. But it's interesting when you're working across jurisdictions. For example, CMHC is one of the mechanisms we use to finance our projects, and CMHC requirements are across the board the same.
Okay.
It's a national, like national type requirements. However, when you apply those national sort of requirements to specific jurisdictions, you're really you get down to the nuts and bolts. So for example, Ontario, is, 15% of our units have to be accessible when we're doing a new build.
Yeah.
And in Alberta, it's zero. So, but there's, accessibility requirements through CMHC. So learning how to apply all of those things, the national standards across each jurisdiction, and how we design it can be tricky, but it's not dull.
Okay. Well, that's good. Keeps you on their toes.
Yeah.
Now, you guys are clearly experts at a broad range and size of products. Branding and marketing. How does branding and marketing differ in your world of purpose-built rentals compared to, let's say, pre-construction condos? What do you see as the biggest difference from your side of the fence?
Yeah, it's there's certainly as much as people from a context of after things are built, they look at them and they very much interchange the word condo and apartment.
Yeah.
But they're so incredibly different in how you go about building them, marketing them, and all the like. So from the context of the condo world, there's pre-sales. You're trying to collect deposits, determine if the project is viable based on how many deposits you're collecting, and so you're going out very early to market.
Right.
Whereas in the apartment realm, um, we're fronting the money to build, and you're not marketing your product until well into when you've built it. You've done your branding and your logo and you've got your stuff up, but you're not actually going to market with your product until,
Right.
6 months to a year in advance of when that build is actually going to be complete. So certainly that approach is very, very different. And then, the build is different and how you're marketing to a community.
Yeah.
We're not looking at when you're marketing to condo, a lot of it is investors and individual investors who are looking to either live in that unit or rent that single particular unit. Whereas we're looking at it from a context of a community,
Right.
and we're marketing to build a community. And so, we have our resident managers who live in the building, who are there 24/7. Our operations teams are, on site. We have, full teams, and we're really trying to build that community with events and all of those other things. So we're managing it differently, and so I think we have to capture that operations and the management context and the community building within our marketing, within the marketing of the development.
That makes sense. Now, would you say, not to throw jabs, but would you say you care a little bit more about what you're building because you're the ones that have to manage and maintain it versus condos?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think we do, right? Because I mean, we at the end of the day, we're going to be holding it and we're going to
Right.
be maintaining it. And so it's very important to us, the mechanical systems that we put in have to
Yeah.
be, we want them to work. We want them to have longevity. The tenants, we're selective about, we want to make sure that the tenants that are in our buildings are great tenants and are kind to the other tenants that are living with them,
Yeah.
because we are trying to build that community and make it safe and pleasurable for all the people that are going to live there. So, um, and our resident managers are going to also live in those buildings, right? So,
Yeah.
we want to create a great work environment for them. So we certainly have a vested interest in building something great, um, because it's going to be ours and we want to be proud of it.
Well, I love that. Now, it's obviously a competitive space. How does Killam apply strategies to attract these tenants or build trust or differentiate yourselves in such a competitive market?
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to, we our brand is really like we very much live our core values. And our core values, two of those things are really, we want to build community. That's one of our strongest ones, and strong customer relationships.
Okay.
So we are, like I said, embedded into the communities that we are building in, and And so, having those resident managers, you know, people ask us about that, when they're
Right.
renting, like, how do you care for this building? And if we say, you've got somebody there 24/7, we have the emergency services, we have all of those things in place, it gives our tenants a lot of peace of mind,
Yeah.
that they know who they're going to if there's a problem. They know that there's a structure in place, and things in place. And from just even from a cleanliness perspective, and
Yeah.
the cleanliness, the curb appeal, our buildings are consistent. We take good care of them, consistently, no matter where that building is, and we have consistent standards. And I think that's a great thing that we can do to continue to build that brand and market accordingly. Um,
That
and
makes a lot of sense
being
because you're the benefit as well of being as large as you are is people are on the move. So if I've had a good experience with a Killam property in the past, I'm going to be more likely to choose another one. Or great online reviews and networking experiences are all going to help somebody choose your property over the others, which is a great
Yeah.
long term play.
And we do every year we do our tenant surveys,
Okay,
across the country, and so we're measuring ourselves year after
I
year
like that.
about what can we do, what can we do better, or where are we not performing as well as we'd like to be. And those things are very important to us because it is our business, and we want to. It's customer service oriented, and we very much look at ourselves as a very service oriented company. So.
And even turnover, right? You're going to have some parallels to software as a service tech companies, and that turnover really does make a serious impact, the
Yes.
percentage you have, right?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
It's awesome. Okay, so next I want to talk about the fact that Killam has a significant presence in secondary markets, I would call them. And that's actually going to be the next topic of our Pre-Con Recon report that's going to launch, number 2. What are some of the unique challenges, opportunities that you find from a branding and marketing perspective in these regions compared to, say, primary hubs like GTA, Calgary, Vancouver?
Yeah, I think, the secondary markets, we love the secondary markets. They are, I want to say, consistent.
Mm,
There's a lot more consistency with them. You're not getting the highs of highs and the lows of lows. You get to be embedded in those communities, and you become recognizable, whether that's in when you're building and you have relationships with the people that your consultants and your teams, and the municipalities. But also, like you said, you're moving from one, you could move from one building to another, right?
yep,
And there's that recognizable factor to it. And it also helps us to really get to know what the communities need, um,
yep.
and what a neighborhood is like or not like. And so you become far more embedded into the community itself. And it also helps us, I want to say, we like to do a lot of, we do a lot of community building, and we do a lot of volunteering within our communities. So things such as, in London, for example, we have, a dedicated guest suite for the hospital. So,
Mm,
if there's, it's basically held for high risk pregnancies, and for mothers that have to, if they're traveling from out of town and need specialized services in London, we hold a guest suite for the hospital. So
that's
you
amazing.
can really work with your local communities versus sort of being just one member of a giant community. You can really embed yourself in the community and make a difference.
Yes, I love that. And now, how would you say tenant expectations differ in these secondary markets? Like, do people expect different things in a secondary market than they would in a busy, bustling GTA, Vancouver? What's your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest one is really, I mean,
Okay.
unit size, parking, and amenities, right?
Yep.
So, in a places outside of, Toronto, the very heavy centers, the expectation is that unit sizes are a bit larger.
Yep.
They have an expectation on bedroom size or living size, and that's a big one. And even within those secondary units or secondary markets, the difference between an uptown or downtown unit
Yeah.
versus a suburban unit. You know, there's an expectation of cars, in that suburban unit, less so in the urban center, but there's still an expectation in an urban center
Yeah.
for parking even in in an uptown location in that secondary market. So understanding, sort of how that shifts, but trying to build a Toronto product in Kitchener,
Yeah.
it may work in certain periods of time,
Yeah.
in high demand periods of time, but over the long haul, um, those slightly larger units are going to make the difference of your marketability in a secondary market.
That makes a lot of sense. And you talked about amenities. How would you say amenities really differ in a purpose-built rental versus the condos? Condo world, you can get some pretty fancy amenities. I'm sure purpose-built rental, maybe in the past, amenities were simpler, maybe even in some communities non-existent. Are amenities growing? What are some trends you see in the amenity side?
Yeah, it's very demographic dependent.
Okay.
So, there's been shifts, a lot of shifts. I mean, part of it comes down to, what's affordable to even build.
Yeah.
We will build, a lot of I want to say the more uptown or urban markets, the expectation, there's always a gym, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's sort of mandatory is the gym, but you're trying to work with your tenants and what they need. So we're finding a lot of pets. So
Yeah.
our new buildings we've been incorporating pet spas.
Okay.
So commercial washes for animals because we do find so many, right?
Yeah.
So you're sort of working with that tenant need, but some of our, I want to say again, our urban, there's a lot of tech, a lot
Yeah.
of sort of work from home. So we're putting in these like co-work pods, right, or
Okay.
working pods, so that
Yeah.
people can sort of get out of their space and work in these little pods that they're just incredibly popular.
Okay.
Um, but in some locations, we're building a building in Calgary. We're going to be starting to build a building in Calgary in the near future, where we have about 1,000 units, and it's overall total, and we're going to be putting in a clubhouse. And
Okay.
we have a similar development in Ottawa where there's a clubhouse facility. So it's a
Cool.
communal facility for, in Ottawa or in Canada, it's 5 buildings, but it has a large facility in the middle with a gym and a pool and things of that nature that are used by the occupancy there. But it's in that regard, it's an older demographic. It runs as a retirement community in
I see.
some
Yeah.
respects, right?
Yeah.
So you're really working those amenities around the demographics that you're seeing in the community and the
Okay.
location.
And what about like with affordability, with more and more potentially families, young families, growing families, potentially renting? Are you seeing any more family-oriented amenities like kids' rooms, playgrounds, daycare centers, like any trends in that direction?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. We one of the buildings, actually the one that we're talking about in Calgary,
Okay.
it's certainly a large demographic. We have a lot of 2 and 3 bedroom units.
Okay.
It's a lot of families in a more suburban setting, and so there's the sort of lots of open space, trails around, some playground area. And then we're actually in the one building we're putting in pickleball. We're putting in a
Okay.
pickleball court, and things of that nature, right? So you really start to work with the demographics that and the trends, but you want them to be, I want to say, transitional. So pickleball may be fantastic now, but we can use it as a basketball court or a gym or
Right.
training facility and things of that nature. So they want to be versatile, but we have in some buildings we have golf simulators,
Yeah.
or it's very um, the demographics. We certainly work with the demographics that are going to be in a particular space,
Awesome.
and we know what we're targeting. I mean, if it's I want to say, you're getting into some of those urban buildings, you're not going to see quite as many families, although we do build some family sized suites.
Yeah.
But you're going to get sort of, that the young professional who is
Yeah.
sort of looking for the pool table or
Hmm.
or the cool outdoor patio or whatever it might be. So you kind of have to work with a multitude of tenants, but um, you know, certainly the amenities are really important in allowing us to build that community and meet your neighbors and all of those things. So
Yep. Okay.
yeah.
And what about product shift across the portfolio? Are you guys leaning or moving towards more luxury units? Do you have mid-market units? Is that shifting based on market conditions? What's going on there?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? We certainly, I want to say we're shifting, but we're always playing the long game, right?
Mhm.
So, when you're thinking about how you're building and when you're building, it has to work. It has to work now, but it also has to work in the future. So you don't want to swing too far one way or too far the other, right?
Yeah.
You always have to keep that long game in mind and what's going to work, for your tenants over the course of the long term. So I would say we certainly are thinking about, you know, it's a lot of it is area dependent, suburban versus urban,
Yep.
and the things like underground parking, right?
Yep.
Can we do an urban site or a suburban site without underground parking because the underground parking is so expensive to build?
Yep.
So do we have a little bit more land to work with? Can we build stick versus concrete? We're certainly doing those things,
Okay.
changing the materials in the building, and things of that nature to try and create that affordability. And a lot of it's related to scale and location.
Yep. Okay. Now, as you mentioned, broad portfolio, multiple regions, product types. How do you balance internal marketing team versus vendors like ourselves who, we've worked together on a couple projects? How do you make that decision internally, building out the team? What do you keep in-house versus when's the right time to bring a partner in?
Well, it's really interesting because when you're working, across the country,
Hmm.
and you have I want to say your head office located in one space in one area. um, it's so important to have local partners, right?
Right.
Because they know the local market,
Yeah.
and that's, I want to say, the greatest benefit we have of having the local partners, um, where we can rely on sort of that, the local knowledge of the market, how to brand a building locally,
Yeah.
what the competition looks like locally. And so we're very reliant on our partners, um, in those regions sort of outside of, where we're located, from a head office perspective. We're great with doing some of our own, I'd say, like, our day-to-day stuff we can market
Yeah.
on our own, as far as, posting things and, from all of our existing buildings, right? So we have
Yeah.
our sort of internal network of um, of people that we communicate with, and but when it comes down to especially the new builds, um, how are we going to differentiate ourselves? What's the market saying? What are our competitors looking like?
Yeah.
And who are we specifically marketing to in a specific neighborhood? What does that
Right.
neighborhood need and looking for? So that's really where we rely heavily on our partners across the country.
Okay. And then I also like there's a scale I find. There's developers that the product is all finished, wrapped with a bow, and they bring in the marketing firm and say, stick a name and a brand on it, to
Yes.
branding at pretty early phase of you've got a structure and a site plan together, but final architectural interior design decisions haven't been made. Where on that scale are you typically bringing a vendor in? Because, we we've done both, and we've definitely seen the value. And the earlier you start, the more it's a cohesive piece. Where do you guys sit on that spectrum?
Yeah, and I think as we continue to build more and more, we're getting, I want to say, earlier and earlier in the process. And I find that there's a strong partnership, especially when you're working with local people. So in Waterloo, where we are, it's, um, having people that have worked together before,
Yeah.
from an interior design, from an architecture, from the branding and marketing, all of those pieces, there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of synergies, and so it helps to have everybody sort of on the same page and giving their ideas and their thoughts, right from the beginning, because it's a lot easier to sort of integrate the team early on, and come up with that vision and start it early,
Yeah.
um, and really like set the tone, right? Set the tone early. You can go to market when you want to go to market, but having the strategy and the elements such as logos, branding, all of those things in place, it's really important to have that right off the hop, so you can get ready to put your presence out there as soon as you're ready to put your presence out there.
Yep. That makes sense. And then, if we talk about purpose-built rentals, obviously pre-construction condos, the market's at an interesting point. There's a lot of people launching, a lot of people holding, waiting and seeing. Do you find the same effect on the rental side, or is rental market pretty consistent compared to condo?
It's funny. This market, it's it's so jurisdictional. I will
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
I have the opportunity to travel quite a bit, and when I'm in Alberta, I mean, the amount of building that's happening in Alberta, is it's insane, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
single family home or condo or like it, I mean, they're building in Alberta. You go to Halifax right now, there's, between condo and apartment, there's, 35 to 40 cranes.
Wow.
They're not stopping in those jurisdictions.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot of that is it's regional.
Yeah.
But I will say in this current space, especially in, the Southern Ontario market, there's, I want to say, at this stage of the game, a distinct advantage for apartments
Yeah.
in some of the opportunities, through CMHC and some of the CMHC programs. There are some opportunities for the apartment space that's not there for the condo space at this stage of the game, and
Yeah.
and again, it comes down to the deposits and all of those things. The condo developers, if they can't get those deposits and they don't have buyers, they're not going to build without the buyers.
Yeah.
And so they're very dependent on that piece, whereas the apartment, you're you're not as dependent on that, but you're also taking your own set of risks
Yeah.
and really fronting that money, which
You
is
got to
right.
commit.
So you're committing, and you're all in, right? And you also have to, accommodate for carrying costs at that end, where,
Yeah.
from a perspective of a condo, if you can pre-sale and you've got your pre-sales in and you know how many you've sold and all of that stuff, you have a bit more certainty in that
Yeah.
element. Whereas when you're building the apartment, you're fronting it, and then you hope your leasing is very successful and that you're in a quick lease up,
Yeah.
and able to get the rents that you need to be able to finance that project. But very different realms.
Yeah.
But I would say at this stage of the game, there are some additional incentives, really, because of some of the CMHC programs and so forth, that allow us to move forward with some of the apartment builds that we're looking to
Okay.
do.
Now, I think in the report, it's almost ready, but I think there's a stat 20 to 30% of developers, traditionally pre construction condo, are exploring purpose built rentals
Yeah.
with some of these incentives. What do you think is the biggest challenge or unexpected challenge they're going to face in making a switch if they pull the trigger? What do you think is going to catch them by surprise?
Yeah, it's the financing is a big one,
Okay.
right? Because there's a lot of upfront money.
Yeah.
And so being able to have that capital upfront is it's important.
Yeah.
And then, being able to then carry it, if your lease up is slow, you got to be able to carry it. And then at the end of it, you have to take into account all of those operational costs.
Yeah.
So, it's that mindset is very, very different right from the beginning is, mechanically, how are we going to, make this building efficient? And, it's you're not picking the necessarily the cheapest options. You're
Right.
picking out the options with the greatest longevity and the greatest, operational savings along the way. So your upfront costs are going to be sometimes they're going to be higher based on those choices to save you in the long run, which
Yep.
is a very different mindset than if you're building and then selling those units.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. Well, okay, Carrie, I've got one last question for you. Looking
Sure.
ahead, what are some of the trends or innovations you see that you're most excited about in any aspect of the development life cycle? You touch all aspects of it. So what are maybe one or two that are getting you excited that you think is going to have a big impact?
Well, I would say from an excited perspective, it may not be a trend, but for us as Killam, our growth in different markets.
Okay.
So, I'm excited, personally, I'm excited about our growth in BC.
Yep.
A few years ago, we purchased some buildings on the island, and they've been fantastic buildings. It's a great place to be. So watching our growth out west is going to be a lot of fun and exciting to be part of. The other thing I feel like I'm excited but scared about at the same time is, as we move into, the ESG pieces,
Hmm.
a lot of the mechanical trends and mechanical advances that are being made, the traditional systems are sort of, they're, I want to say not done, but with the financing requirements and all of the things that we need to do to make our buildings energy efficient, the mechanical trends are, they seem to be changing, annually, if not
Okay.
faster. But I mean, as we build, we're always continually evaluating mechanical systems,
Yep.
um, which is exciting, but scary at the same time because,
Probably a lot of
you're
unknowns with new technology.
new technologies and things of that nature. So, I'm excited about it, but it's a lot of evaluation and being an engineering nerd, it is, I suppose, exciting from from my end. But yeah, I think those are some of the things that are, I want to say exciting, but it's building, is fun. It really is fun, and it's
What
rewarding at
about
the end.
what about, I know there's lots of new technology coming out like prefab, pre-built, like is that whole
Yep.
space being explored by Killam as well in some of your
Yes.
buildings or
Yeah.
yeah.
We're, I would say, continually exploring like we're doing, um, we're doing some wood frame structures, we're doing concrete structures, we're doing precast, we're doing, right now we've got, basically three projects we're working on locally that, one precast, one cast in place, and one wood structure.
Okay.
So, we're definitely doing different things in different, for different buildings and seeing, what's efficient, what's working. And so, yeah, definitely different, looking at different materialities and, um, it's fun to try new things. But and mass timber, there's always changes in mass timber, and the building codes are all changing, and so there's so many things that we have to be on top of right now. And we can go higher with wood now, and but insurance costs are higher with wood, and so it's just, there's a lot of moving parts,
Big
and
puzzle.
it's a puzzle, but it's an exciting puzzle to work with. And
Yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, I've been talking to Carrie Curtis. Carrie, for people who want to learn more about you, where can we send them?
But please send them to our website,
Okay.
and you can find us on the web, sort of everywhere. Lots of locations in 7 provinces, and we are also a publicly traded company, so we
Okay.
can be found. We can be found at, I should know this off the top of my head because I it's no we are at KMP dot as our ticker.
Okay, amazing. Well, Carrie, thanks so much for joining me on the Pre-Con Recon podcast, brought to you by him and her.
Perfect.